Flemish literature. Flemish literature is literature from Flanders, historically a region comprising parts of present-day Belgium, France, and the Netherlands. Until the early 19th century, this literature was regarded as an integral part of Dutch literature. After Belgium became independent from the Netherlands in 1830, the term Flemish literature acquired a narrower meaning and refers to the Dutch language literature produced in Belgium. It remains a part of Dutch language literature. Medieval Flemish literature. In the earliest stages of the Dutch language, a considerable degree of mutual intelligibility with somewhat we now call German dialects was present, and some fragments and authors are claimed for both realms. Examples include the 12th century poet Hendrik van Velde, who is claimed by both Dutch and German literature. In the first stages of Flemish literature, poetry was the predominant form of literary expression. In the Low Countries, as in the rest of Europe, courtly romance and poetry were popular genres during the Middle Ages. One such minnesänger was the aforementioned Van Velde. The chivalric epic was a popular genre as well, often featuring King Arthur or Charlemagne Kerel as protagonist, with notable example of Kerel and Elegast, Dutch for Charlemagne, and the elf spirit/elfgest. The first Dutch-language writer known by name is the 12th century county of Loon poet Hendrik van Velde, an early contemporary of Walter van der Voogd. Van Velde wrote courtly love poetry, a hagiography of St. Servatius, and an epic retelling of the Aeneid in a Limburgish dialect that straddles the Dutch-German language boundary. A number of the surviving epic works, especially the courtly romances, were copies from or expansions of earlier German or French efforts, but there are examples of truly original works such as the anonymously written Kerel and Elegast, and original Dutch language works that were translated into other languages, notable Dutch morality play Elker Lake form. Apart from ancient tales embedded in Dutch folk songs, virtually no genuine folk tales of Dutch antiquity have come down to us, and scarcely any echoes of Germanic myth. On the other hand, the sagas of Charlemagne and Arthur appear immediately in Middle Dutch forms. These were evidently introduced by wandering minstrels and translated to gratify the curiosity of the noble women. It is rarely that the name of such a translator has reached us. The Chanson de Roland was translated somewhere in the 12th century, and the Flemish minstrel Diederik van Assenid completed his version of Floris and Blancheflower as Floris and Blancheflower around 1260. The Arthurian legends appear to have been brought to Flanders by some Flemish colonists in Wales on their return to their mother country. Around 1250 a Brabantine minstrel translated the prose Lancelot at the command of his liege, Lodewijk van Velthem. This adaptation, known as the Lancelot Compilati, contains many differences from the French original, and includes a number of episodes that were probably originally separate romances. Some of these are themselves translations of French originals, but others, such as the Maurian, seem to be originals. The Gauvain was translated by Penninck and Vosteert as Roman van Waleweyen before 1260, while the first wholly original Dutch epic writer, Jacob van Maerlant, occupied himself around 1260 with several romances dealing with Merlin and the Holy Grail. The earliest existing fragments of the Epic of Reynard the Fox were written in Latin by Flemish priests, and about 1250 the first part of a very important version in Dutch, Van den Vos Reynard of Reynard, was made by Willem. In his existing work the author follows Pierre de Saint Cloud, but not slavishly, and he is the first really admirable writer that we meet within Dutch literature. The second part was added by another poet, Ernout, of whom we know little else either. The first lyrical writer of the Low Countries was John I, Duke of Brabant, who practiced the Manelied with success. In 1544, the earliest collection of Dutch folk songs saw the light, and in this volume one or two romances of the 14th century are preserved, of which Het Dagje in den Oosten is the best known. Up until now, the Middle Dutch language output mainly serviced the aristocratic and monastic orders, recording the traditions of chivalry and of religion, but scarcely addressed the bulk of the population. With the close of the 13th century, a change came over the face of Dutch literature. The founder and creator of this original Dutch literature was Jacob van Maerlant. His Der Nature and Bloem, the Flower of Nature, written about 1263, takes an important place in early Dutch literature. It is a collection of moral and satirical addresses to all classes of society. With his Rainbabel verse Bible, he foreshadowed the courage and free thought of the Reformation. It was not until 1284 that he began his masterpiece, De Spiegel Historio, the Mirror of History, at the command of Count Floris V. From the very first, the literary spirit in the Low Countries began to assert itself in a homely and utilitarian spirit. Thoroughly aristocratic in feeling was Hem van Aken, a priest of Louvain who lived about 1255–1330, and who combined to a very curious extent the romantic and didactic elements prevailing at the time. As early as 1280 he had completed his translation of the Roman de la Rose, which he must have commenced in the lifetime of its author Jean de Meun. As for prose, the oldest pieces of Dutch prose now in existence are charters of towns in Flanders and Zeeland, dated 1249, 1251, and 1254. Beatrice of Nazareth 1200–1268 was the first known prose writer in the Dutch language, the author of the notable dissertation known as the Seven Ways of Holy Love. From the other Dutch mystics whose writings have reached us, the Brussels friar Jan van Ruysbroek, better known in English as the Blessed John of Ruysbroek, 1293–1381, the father of Dutch prose, stands out. A prose translation of the Old Testament was made about 1300, and there exists a life of Jesus of around the same date. The poets of the Low Countries had already discovered in late medieval times the value of guilds in promoting the arts and industrial handicrafts. The term colleges de rhetoriek, chambers of rhetoric, is supposed to have been introduced around 1440 to the courtiers of the Burgundian dynasty, but the institutions themselves existed long before. These literary guilds, whose members called themselves rederakers or rhetoricians, lasted until the end of the 16th century, and during the greater part of that time preserved a completely medieval character, even when the influences of the Renaissance and the Reformation obliged them to modify in some degree their outward forms. They were in almost all cases absolutely middle class in tone, and opposed to aristocratic ideas and tendencies in thought. Of these chambers, the earliest were almost entirely engaged in preparing mysteries and miracle plays for the people. Towards the end of the 15th century, the Ghent chamber began to exercise a sovereign power over the other Flemish chambers, which was emulated later on in Holland by the Eglantine at Amsterdam. But this official recognition proved of no consequence in literature, and it was not in Ghent but in Antwerp that intellectual life first began to stir. In Holland the burghers only formed the chambers, while in Flanders the representatives of the noble families were honorary members and assisted with their money at the arrangement of ecclesiastical or political pageants. Their Landjuwelen, or tournaments of rhetoric, at which rich prizes were awarded, were the occasions upon which the members of the chambers distinguished themselves. Between 1426 and 1620, at least 66 of these festivals were held. The grandest of all was the festival celebrated at Antwerp on August 3, 1561. The Brussels chamber sent 340 members, all on horseback and clad in crimson mantles. The town of Antwerp gave a ton of gold to be given in prizes, which were shared among 1893 rhetoricians. This was the zenith of the splendor of the chambers, and after this time they soon fell into disfavor. Their dramatic pieces produced by the chambers were of a didactic cast, with a strong farcical flavor, and continued the tradition of Maerlant and his school. They very rarely dealt with historical or even biblical personages, but entirely with allegorical and moral abstractions. The most notable examples of redereker theatre include Mareken van Nijmegen, Mary of Nijmegen, and Elkerlake, which was translated into English as Everyman. Of the pure farces of the rhetorical chambers we can speak with still more confidence, for some of them have come down to us, and among the authors famed for their skill in this sort of writing are named Cornelis Everard of Bruges and Laurens Jansen of Haarlem. The material of these farces is extremely raw, consisting of rough jests at the expense of priests and foolish husbands, silly old men and their light wives. The chambers also encouraged the composition of songs, but with very little success. They produced no lyrical genius more considerable than Matthijs de Kastelein 1488–1550 of Oudenaarde, author of De Kunste van Rhetoriek in the Art of Rhetoric. The first writer who used the Dutch tongue with grace and precision of style was a woman and a professed opponent of Lutheranism and Reformed thought. Modern Dutch literature practically begins with Anna Bayens c. 1494–1575. Bayens, who is believed to have been born at Antwerp in 1494, was a schoolmistress at that city in her middle life. She died on April 10, 1575. From her work we know that she was a lay nun, and that she occupied a position of honor and influence in Antwerp. Bayens' main subjects were faith and the character of Luther. In her first volume of poetry 1528 the Lutherans are scarcely mentioned, and the focus is on her personal experience of faith. In the volume of poetry of 1538 every page is occupied with invective against the Lutherans. All the poems of Anna Bayens still extant are of the form called refrain and refrains. Her mastery over verse form is considered to be remarkable. With the writings of Anna Bayens, the period of Middle Dutch closes and Modern Dutch begins. Split between North and South. Flanders formed a political and cultural whole with the Netherlands until 1579, when, as a result of the Reformation, the Protestant northern provinces, part of today's Netherlands, split off from the Roman Catholic South, which remained under Spanish rule. While the Republic of the Seven United Netherlands witnessed its golden age, the southern Netherlands suffered war and misery under Spanish occupation. As the Protestants fled from the Catholic southern Netherlands, the once prospering port town of Antwerp started to decline as a metropolis, and this to the benefit of towns and cities in the Netherlands, like Amsterdam, The Hague, Rotterdam, and Utrecht. As a result of these political developments, the literature in the South, Flanders, and Brabant changed its character. The flowering of medieval literature came to an abrupt end, while in the 17th century the North knew a golden age in the arts, including literature. With the mass exodus of Flemish intellectuals to the Dutch Republic, literary activity in Flanders virtually came to a halt. In the French-occupied part of Flanders, a few major figures were active, including Dominique de Jonge (1654–1717), who translated Le Cid by Pierre Corneille into Dutch, the poet Michiel de Sween (1654–1707), who wrote the epic Het. During the 18th century, Flemish literary production was at a low tide. In 1761 Jan des Roches, who was born in The Hague, published the Nieuw Nederduits Spreekkunst, a Dutch grammar that attempted to challenge the use of Latin as a culture language and French as the language of prestige by elaborating a standardized Southern Dutch Flemish language. The Brussels lawyer Jan Baptist Verlooy (1746–1797) wrote the Verhandeling op dan het Moederlijk Tale in de Nederlanden, Treatise on the Negligence of the Mother Tongue in the Netherlands, 17a, a report on the status of the Dutch language and the contempt with which it was treated in the past. Other important authors include Willem Verhoeven (1738–1809), Charles Brocaert (1767–1826), author of the Flemish popular novel Jel en Maïtje, and Jan Baptist Hoffman (1758–1835), author of middle-class tragedies. Reunification and new split. To split, to split, to split, split. After the conclusion of the Napoleonic Wars, Belgium and the Netherlands were reunited in 1815 under Dutch rule as the United Kingdom of the Netherlands. The reunification led to a wider recognition of the Dutch language in Belgium. Resentment of Dutch rule by the French-speaking elites and the Catholic Church created a climate in which the Belgians revolted against Dutch rule in 1830, an event which is known as the Belgian Revolution. The immediate result of the Belgian Revolution was a reaction against everything associated with the Dutch, and a disposition to regard the French language as the speech of liberty and independence. The Provisional Government of 1830 suppressed the official use of the Dutch language, which was relegated to the rank of a patois. For some years before 1830, Jan Frans Willems (1793–1846) had been advocating the use of the Dutch language. He had done his best to allay the frictions between the Netherlands and Belgium, and to prevent a separation. As archivist of Antwerp, he had access to direct sources that allowed him to write a history of Flemish literature. After the Revolution, his Dutch sympathies made it necessary for him to keep a low profile for a while, but in 1835 he settled in Ghent and devoted himself to the cultivation of the Dutch language. He edited old Flemish classics, such as Reinier de Vos (1836), the rhyming chronicles of Jan van Heeloo and Jean Leclerc, etc. He gathered around him a group of people such as the Chevalier Philip Blommaert (1809–1871), Karel Lodewijk Ledigank (1805–1847), Frans Rens (1805–1874), Ferdinand, Augustin Sneller (1809–1872), Prudens van Dys (1804–18). Philip Blommaert, who was born in Ghent on 27 August 1809, founded in 1834 in his native town the Nederduits Letteroefeningen, a review for new writers. This magazine was speedily followed by other Flemish organs and by literary societies for the promotion of Dutch in Flanders. In 1851, a central organization for the Flemish propaganda was provided by a society named after the father of the movement, the Willemsfonds. The Roman Catholic Flemings founded in 1874 a rival David Sfonds, called after the energetic Jean-Baptiste David (1801–1866), professor at the Universiteit Katholiek de Leuven-Leuven, and the author of a Dutch history book on Belgium Vaderlandsche Historie. As a result of this propaganda, the Dutch language was placed on an equality with French in law and in administration in 1873 and 1878, and in the schools in 1883. Finally, in 1886, a Flemish academy was established by royal authority at Ghent, where a course in Flemish literature had been established as early as 1854. The claims put forward by the Flemish school were justified by the appearance 1837 of Inti Wonderjaar 1566, in the wonderful year of Hendrik Conscience, who roused national enthusiasm by describing the heroic struggles of the Flemings against the Spaniards. Conscience was eventually to make his greatest successes in the description of contemporary Flemish life, but his historical romances and his popular history of Flanders helped to give a popular basis to a movement which had been started by professors and scholars. The first poet of the new school was Karel Lodewijk Ledigank, the best known of whose poems are those on the three sister cities of Bruges, Ghent, and Antwerp de Drie Zustersteden, Vaderlandse Trilogie, Ghent, 1846, in which he makes an impassioned protest against the adoption of French ideas, manners, and language, and the neglect of Flemish tradition. The book speedily took its place as a Flemish classic. Ledigank, who was a magistrate, also translated the French code into Dutch. Jan Theodore van Raeswijk (1811–1849), after serving as a volunteer in the campaign of 1830, settled down as a clerk in Antwerp, and became one of the hottest champions of the Flemish movement. He wrote a series of political and satirical songs admirably suited to his public. The romantic and sentimental poet Jan van Beers was typically Flemish in his sincere and moral outlook on life. Prudens van Dys, whose most ambitious work was the epic Artevelde 1859, is perhaps best remembered by a collection 1844 of poems for children. Peter Frans van Kerkhoven (1818–1857), a native of Antwerp, wrote novels, poems, dramas, and a work on the Flemish revival De Vleemstbeweging 1847. Antwerp produced a realistic novelist in Jan Lambrecht Domien Sleeks 1818–1901. An inspector of schools by profession, he was an indefatigable journalist and literary critic. He was one of the founders in 1844 of the Vlaams België, the first daily paper in the Flemish interest. His works include a long list of plays, among them Jan Steen 1852, a comedy, Gretry, which gained a national prize in 1861, Vissers van Blankenberge 1863, and the patriotic drama of Zanneken 1865. His talent as a novelist was diametrically opposed to the idealism of conscience. He was precise, sober, and concrete in his methods, relying for his effect on the accumulation of carefully observed detail. He was particularly successful in describing the life of the shipping quarter of his native town. Among his novels are In Schipperskwartier 1856, Dirk Mayer 1860, Tiberts and Sy 1867, Kunstenliefde Art and Love 1870, and Vesalius in Spange 1895. His complete works were collected in 17 volumes 1877–1884. Jan Renier Sneeders 1812–1888 wrote novels dealing with North Brabant. His brother, August Sneeders 1825–1904, began by writing historical novels in the manner of conscience, but his later novels are satires of contemporary society. A more original talent was displayed by Anton Bergman, 1835–1874, who, under the pseudonym of Tony, wrote Ernest Stah's Advocat, which gained the Quennial Prize of Literature in 1874. In the same year appeared the Novelin of the Sisters Rosalie 1834–1875 and Virginie Loveling 1836–1923. These simple and touching stories were followed by a second collection in 1876. The sisters had published a volume of poems in 1870. Virginie Loveling's gifts of fine and exact observation soon placed her in the front rank of Flemish novelists. Her political sketches, in Ons Vlaamse Geweest in 1877, were published under the name of W. G. E. Walter. Sophie 1885, Eender Eid 1892, and Het Land der Verbeelding 1896 are among the more famous of her later works. Riemann Staines 1850–1905 and Isidor Teirlinck 1851–1934 produced in collaboration one very popular novel, Arm Vlaanderen 1884, and some others, and have since written separately. Cyril Buys, a nephew of Virginie Loveling, is a disciple of Emile Zola. Het Recht van den Sterkst, The Right of the Strongest, 1893, is a picture of vagabond life in Flanders. Schappenbouwer, The Knave of Spades, 1898, deals with brutalized peasant life, and Sursum Corda, 1895, describes the narrowness and religiosity of village life. In poetry, Julius de Jater, 1830–1905, author of a rhymed translation of Reunification 1874, an epic poem on Charles V 1888, etc., produced a social epic in 3 parts. The songs of Julius Weilstek 1836–1903 are full of liberal and patriotic ardor, but his later life was devoted to politics rather than literature. He had been the leading spirit of a students' association at Ghent for the propagation of Flemish views, and the Willemsfonds owed much of its success to his energetic co-operation. His Uithet Studentenleven appeared in 1868, and his poems were collected in 1881. The poems of Mimi van Acker 1803–1884, Nie Maria Duleeg, were modeled on Dutch originals. Johanna Kortmans 1811–1890, Nie Birchmans, owed her fame rather to her tales than her poems. She was above all a moralist, and her 50 tales are sermons on economy and the practical virtues. Other poets were Emmanuel Heel, author of comedies, opera libretti, and some admirable songs, the Abbe Guido Giselle, who wrote religious and patriotic poems in the dialect of West Flanders, Lodewijk de Koning 1838–1924, who attempted a great epic subject in Menschem Verlost 1872, Johann Michiel Dotzenberg 18. The best of Dotzenberg's work is contained in the posthumous volume of 1869, published by his son-in-law, Frans de Court 1834–1878, who was himself a songwriter, and translated songs from Robert Burns, from Jacques Jasmin, and from German. The Mackamen and Gazellen 1866, adapted from Ruckert's version of Hariri, and other volumes by Jan Fergot J.A. van Drugenbroek 1835–1902 show a growing preoccupation with form, and with the work of gentle Theodore Anthony's 1840–1907 they prepare the way for the ingenious and careful work. He was born at Wembeck in Brabant in 1857 and became professor in the Academy of the Fine Arts at Antwerp. He introduced something of the ideas and methods of contemporary French writers into Flemish verse, and explained his theories in 1898 in an inlading tot de poesie. Among Paul de Mont's numerous volumes of verse dating from 1877 onwards are Clarabella 1893 and Iris 1894, which contains amongst other things a curious Uit de Legend van Jeskia ben Joseph, a version of the gospel story from a Jewish peasant. Mention should also be made of the history of Gent van den Vierhoogsten Tijd tot Heden 1882–1889 by Frans de Potter 1834–1904, and of the art criticisms of Max Rous's 1839–1914, curator of the Planten Mortis Museum in Antwerp, and of Julius. 20th century. In the 20th century, Flemish literature evolved further and was influenced by the international literary evolution. Cyril Buys and Steyn Stuyvels were influenced by the naturalist literary fashion, while Felix Timmermans was a neo-romanticist. After World War I, the poet Paul van Ostaagen was an important representative of expressionism in his poems. In between World War I and World War II, Gerard Walschap, Willem Elschot, and Marnix Jason were prominent Flemish writers. After World War II, the first avant-garde magazine Tijd en Mense Time and People was published from 1949 up to 1955. In 1955 it was succeeded by Garde Civic E, Civil Guard up to 1964, with Hugues C. Pernath and Paul Snoek. The most prominent Flemish Tiger E generation 50s was Hugo Claus, who plays an important role in Flemish literature since then. Other post-war poets were Anton van Wilderode and Christine de Heem. Some of the writers who made their debut after 1960 are Eddie van Vliet, Herman de Koninck, Roland Joris, Patrick Conrad, and Luc Gruez. The renewal of the Flemish prose immediately after World War II was the work of Hugo Claus and Louis Paul Boon. Johan Daesney and Hubert Lampo introduced magic realism in Flemish literature. Ivo Michiels and Paul de Wispelaar represented the new novel. In the 80s, Walter van den Broek and Monica van Piemel continued to write in the style of Louis Paul Boon. Other contemporary authors are Ward Reislink and Jeff Gerarts, Patrick Conrad, Christian Hemmerrechts, Eric de Kuyper, Stefan Hertmans, Paul Host, Paul Cleese, Jan Lo Rines, and Provost and Jos van der Loo. In the 90s, the Generation X, with Herman Brusselmans and Tom Lanoy, made their debut on the Flemish literary scene. Overview. Johan Antherens 1937–2000. Pieter Aspier Aspeslag 1953–2021. Aster Berghoff Lode van den Berg, born 1920. Louis Paul Boon 1912–1979. Herman Brusselmans, born 1957. Libera Carlier 1926–2007. Ernest Cleese 1885–1968. Paul Cleese, born 1943. Hugo Claus 1929–2008. Patrick Conrad, born 1945. Johan Daesney Herman Theory 1912–1978. Herman de Koninck 1944–1997. Saskia de Koster, born 1976. Philip de Pilissen 1891–1962. Rita de Meester 1946–1993. Willem Elschot 1882–1960. Marnix Jason 1899–1984. Maurice Gilliams 1900–1982, Locke Grew born 1953, Christian Hemmerrechts born 1955, Stefan Hertmans born 1951, Carol Jinkier 1906–1993, Paul Kenny's 1885–1934, Eric de Kuyper born 1942, Hubert Lampo 1922–2006, Tom Lanoy born 1958, Jan Lowell Rhines born 1969, Morris Maeterlinck 1862–1949, Tom Nigels born 1975, Alice Nahon 1896–1933, Leo Placier born 1945, and Provost born 1964, Johann de Boos, Jean Ray John Flanders 1887–1964, Willem Roggeman born 1935, Maria Rossiels 1916–2005, Moritz Sab 1873–1938, Paul Snoke 1933–1981, Stan Stuvels 1871–1969, Herman Terlink 1879–1967, Joti T. Hooft 1956–1977, Felix Timmermans 1886–1947, Marcel van Meel 1931–2009, Paul van Ostaagen 1896–1928, Paul Verhegen born 1965, Peter Verhelst born 1962, Gerard Walschap 1898–1989, Lode Zeelands 1901–1944. References for 19th century. Kishom, Hugh ed. 1911. Flemish Literature. Encyclopaedia Britannica 11th ed. Cambridge University Press. This article in turn cites Ida van Duringsveld, van der Schelde bis zur Maas. Des J. Steigleben der Vlemingen Leipzig, 3 vols. 1861. J. Stetcher, Histoire de la littérature néerlandaise in Belgique, 1886. Theodore Koopman and L. Sharp, Gestedienst der Vlaamse Letterkunde, Van het jaar 1830 tot Heden 1899. A. de Koninck, Bibliographie nationale, 3 vols. 1886–1897. Paul Heinlius, Histoire poétique et littéraire du mouvement flamand, 1894. Frans de Potter, Vlaamse Bibliographie issued by the Flemish Academy of Ghent contains a list of publications between 1830 and 1890. W. J. A. Huberts et al. Biographisch Woordenboek der Noord- en Zuid-Nederlandsche Letterkunde 1878.